Well, hello and welcome to the Verity Podcast. This is episode 6, and today we got the whole family here. We got my mom, Geraldine, and Ben here today, and me and Kayla both as well. And today we wanted to talk about Sound of Freedom. So that's a recent movie that came out about human trafficking, child trafficking in particular. And I think it had a pretty profound impact on all of us. And we really wanted to dive into it and talk about it because it was, like I said, really, really impactful. And there's a lot of stuff surrounding it, surrounding the story, that's really interesting and has implications for all of us and, filmmakers.
So, Sound of Freedom, when I first saw the posters for it, I didn't really know much about it. The only thing I knew was that it was being distributed by Angel Studios and that Jim Caviezel was a star. That's literally all I really knew about it. Didn't have any expectations going into it, but I've heard a lot. What really got my attention was it wasn't just the Christians that were talking about it. It was a lot of secular film critics that I respect a lot that really were giving this film a positive review. Mel Gibson himself came out and endorsed the film. Granted, Jim Caviezel, that's his Jesus, and a lot of the people that worked on this film were his friends. And so I was very curious about the film, and obviously the topic is something that I feel absolutely needs to be shown. And definitely needs to be talked about. And so I was like, okay, I went very curious. So I went with my mom to see it because I was actually on a business trip, and so I didn't get to see it the first time that y'all went, but I'm glad that my mom went with me that second time, so thank you, Mom. But I saw it, and it was very well done. I was very shocked at how well done it was, and I'm going to say something that I never thought I would say, but I feel like it's one of the best directed films of the year. I mean, as far as the filmmaking, and it does things that I have been screaming for years when it comes to talking about stuff like this. It basically shows you and communicates that child trafficking is happening, but it doesn't actually show it and the gruesome of them actually, doing what they do to the child. They just communicate it. Like simple things like they put the child on the bed and then cut to another scene, or closing of the curtains. I mean, that just gave me chills when they close the curtains. That's all you need, You don't need to actually show it, and I really, really appreciated that about this film because you don't need to show it. You just need to communicate it.
No one would want to watch that.
And nobody would want to watch that.
I don't think you could make this. This movie would not be successful.
Well,
if
it wouldn't be legal, probably.
No, absolutely. He's going back to some of the praises of the film. I thought Jim Caviezel, was absolutely fantastic. I'm almost certain he won't get it, but I feel like he deserves a nomination at the Oscars for this. I mean, I really felt for his character. And then the child actors, holy crap, the child actors in this were just excellent child actors. Like, wow. I mean, I felt for them, and they were just across the board, the acting was just spectacular. Like I said, the filmmaking, it's one of the best well-made films I've seen in a very long time, and as I said, one of the best directed films of the year, for sure. But I know, my mom, I know you had a lot of really interesting stuff to say. One thing that was really interesting is when I saw it, and when I saw the film, there was one problem my mom said. She was like, oh, well, there's one issue I had, and I was like, but she didn't want to bias me, and I saw it, and it ended up being the same thing. There was only really one big problem I had with the film, narrative-wise, and that was the beach scene whenever they save all those kids, and then the kids are cheering and getting all happy and playing music and everything, and they say that's the sound of freedom. That just didn't really work for me because, especially if those kids had gone through what they went through, they wouldn't be cheering and happy. They would be just stone-faced and processing everything that happened and shaking and, just all the stuff that happened to them. And I feel like they wouldn't necessarily be cheering at that particular moment, But that was really the only big problem I had with it. But I know, Mom, you had some things.
Okay, I was going to go back to, I guess, initial thoughts about the film. Of course, I was not really looking forward to seeing it because of the subject matter. Because normally whenever I see a film or, go see a movie, it is, for entertainment. And this was definitely not an entertaining thing to me. And I definitely found myself tearing up through pretty much through the whole thing because it really, really got to me. All of the acting in it was spot on, I thought. But that little boy and the little girl it's just like they weren't acting to me. They were just so real, especially that little boy. And I don't know if it's because I'm a boy mom or not, but the first thing I noticed was there was no mother in the life of these children, too. It was just the dad. And I thought that was interesting. And I don't know if the mother had passed away. That was my, I just had to fill in the blanks there.
Mm.
But this little girl is just precious, and every little girl likes to. Of course, it's very different because this wasn't the U.S., but likes to sing in front of the mirror. Using their hairbrush as the microphone, and it just really showed how this woman, horrible woman, was the talent, had some kind of a talent agency that was the front. And that really hit me, because she was thinking that there's so many little girls that strangers may come up and say, "Oh, you're so pretty," for a modeling or for some talent that they have, and then they get them so easily, and they did show that a little bit, but in this, I didn't know that so many little boys were also taken as well. I had no idea. I was like, why is a little brother there? Because I thought it was mostly little girls. But that little boy in the film, the little actor, he was not acting at all to me. And you just find yourself wanting to go get him. He was just such a precious little thing. And it was just very real. But again, the scene where the children were all happy, and I'm just like, that was definitely not real to me, because children going through that do not have joy even after they're home and they're okay. They have to go through probably years before they find the joy again. They have to have counseling, and they have to have a lot of help for any child who goes through some kind of a trauma. And that was the only part that really was not real to me. There was a lot of things the film brought out that I was not aware of, because I didn't realize, because the man who I can't think of the characters' names, but he was the guy who bought the children to save them. And but he was talking about, I always thought that whenever they bought a child, that it was just one child with one person. But this was like, he said they were turning 4 or 5 tricks a night, which I was like, okay, so they're using them like as a prostitute, but they're babies. And that was very shocking to me, because I didn't realize that was how they, really try not to think about things like this. But, and another thing that hit me was that this was a woman. And when I was a little girl, the thing that we were told, this is quite a while since I've been a little girl, but the thing that we were told was that if you're lost or if you're scared or to look for another woman, to look for a woman to help you. But in this case, there is no way that you would be able to trust a woman now that you didn't know. And that's very bothersome to me, because if I had a daughter right now, I don't know if I would, because I wouldn't be comfortable telling her, oh, you can trust, if you're in a situation you need help, trust a woman. That's just not the case anymore. There's just no way. And I would not know what to say. But at the store now, I see women all the time in line sending their little girls, oh, I forgot this, or I forgot that, go back and get it. Or the child is wanting, oh, you didn't, got something they weren't supposed to, and the mother sends them back. And I just cringe, because I'm like, ugh, you need to keep watch of your kids. And I know you want them to have freedom and to feel grown up and everything, but in the world that we're in right now, I just don't. I just would not feel safe doing that for y'all. I would not let you. If you got something that you weren't supposed to, well, we might get it. It's just probably would get it, but probably would get it.
We
anyway.
did get it.
We did.
But
When they were with their mother, at least, anyway.
Yeah.
But anyway, and another thing about that was really, really sad to me was the lengths that they had to go to get that little girl back. The people that had to die, and you just had to kill anybody in your path to get to her. Because, I mean, it was just horrific, and it's just dangerous, and it's just, and I mean, they had to go by boat, and then, I mean, all kinds of things to be able to get to where she was even, and it was just, that was another thing that was really sad, how many people had to die just to bring one, you know what I mean, just to try to rescue her. And there was other children there too, but you can't get them all because, unless you go in and just kill everybody, I guess. I don't know. It just, the whole thing is just horrible. And it's very sad about, they didn't show the U.S. side of it as much to me because, like there was a little girl, well, she wasn't a little girl, she was 15, I believe, that she went to a Mavericks game with her dad, and she goes to the bathroom, and she's gone. And that story is I don't know I haven't read about the exacts of that, but that's an awful story that brought it really home to me, because a young girl should be able to go to the restroom at a basketball game, but they got her. They're being bold, and they're using women more and more to grab these kids, and it just makes me just makes me sick that this is going on. But I think it's probably also been going on a lot longer than we even imagine. Probably was going on when I was a little girl.
Yeah.
And it's just sheltered from it a lot, probably.
I guess I got some thoughts too, not a whole lot more to add, but for me, when I was first exposed to this, it was the trailer that I saw on YouTube, and me being primed with so many different Christian projects that you see online, most of the time I'm rolling my eyes, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it is just not that high quality, and it shows. And honestly, the trailer did not get my attention for this to begin with. I thought, oh, okay, this is going to be another stupid, cheesy Christian movie. And I was primed to have the absolute lowest expectations of what this was going to be. And then I started hearing reviews, and I started hearing people talk about how amazing it was. And it was so much, it was overwhelming. And, when I saw it, it was of the highest quality. Just like both of them have said, the quality was insanely high. And I think $14 million is not a bad budget, which is what the budget of the film was. But still, I think by today's standards, especially when you're considering it to be of blockbuster caliber like the other films in there, its budget was tiny compared to the budget of some of these other larger blockbuster movies. And I was very impressed with the quality that they were able to get from that. There was still, there's always a little couple things here and there where you can see the budget was thin, but it didn't really impact the quality of the film in any major way at all. And yeah, I think everybody who sees this is going to be impacted from it in a pretty major way. A lot of people are comparing it to Schindler's List because that is kind of the vibe here. It's highlighting something truly terrible. And there's not a whole lot of joy in this. There's not a whole lot. It just, you leave the movie theater feeling kind of bad. It's very somber. But it's one of those that I feel that still everybody needs to see. because everybody needs to be aware of this, whether or not you're a parent or a child. This is something that we all need to understand and know about. But I mean, it's a lot bigger than just what was shown in the movie. I've listened to and I've been trying to.
Sorry, I was just going off of the things that you were talking about, comparing it to other blockbusters that are coming out this year. Obviously, the budget is lower than a lot of them, but what's remarkable to me is this film, beat Mission Impossible at the freaking box office. I mean, we're talking Mission Impossible, one of the biggest, well-known franchises in Hollywood history. There isn't a single film that's even bad, I would say. There's some that are better than others in the franchise, but there's not a single one that's bad. And we've all seen the most recent one, and no spoilers, but it was really good. But, Sound of Freedom actually beat it at the box office, which tells me, I mean, this has been a very eye-opening year of cinema, because this has been the year where a lot of films like Sound of Freedom and, more original films like Oppenheimer. Granted, Oppenheimer is kind of an IP because you got Christopher Nolan directing, and people are just going to go see a Nolan film because Christopher Nolan. But a lot of those types of films are actually getting better numbers at the box office this year than a lot of these other franchise-type movies, which is good because, people need to see that, like if you want the more of Sound of Freedoms to get made, you need to go and support those at the theater. And going off what you were saying about it being a Christian film and everything, and that was the first thing that, that was also kind of my first reaction seeing the trailer. And when I heard the line, God's children are not for sale, my first reaction was, is this going to be another cheesy Christian movie? But when you see it in context of the film and what the story was, that line is awesome. That I absolutely love that line. But, the thing is that, like, it just another prime example of how people are starved for really good Christian stories that are made. Like, I mean, I've said it 1,000 times, like Passion of the Christ, until Joker replaced it, was the highest grossing R-rated film of all time. And it was a okay, Bible film, but it killed it at the box office. And it's like, but people are just itching for a really good and well-made Christian product. And, Sound of Freedom, I feel like, is another example I can point to where people want to see something. I mean, it beat Mission Impossible. That's not something you can just ignore, But just thought I'd throw that out there.
I think it's also important to mention that, it wasn't overtly Christian. I think that's one of the reasons
that is
that
true.
It was successful. It wasn't browbeating you with, like, there was scripture in it, and they quoted the Bible, but nothing felt like, hey, all of you atheists seeing this film, you need to know this, this, and this, and we're going to have a come to Jesus moment in the middle of the film where we're going to stop everything. It was 100% organic, and it was, here's the story. Guess what? Christianity is a part of it because Tim Ballard is a Christian.
Right.
And that was crucial to everything that he was doing, and it showed in the places where it actually made sense to show up in a lot of ways that Desmond Doss's story is the same kind of thing, where it's Christian, but it's Christian because that's just a part of the story. Right. If you're doing a biopic about some really important Muslim person, it would just show up in places where it made sense and where it fits. And it has to be organic as a part of the story.
Right.
But that's one thing a lot of atheists and a lot of other secular, agnostic, and otherwise people who enjoyed the film said about it, because they didn't feel like they were coming to a sermon. Like a lot of other Christian movies, you're going to see a sermon, basically.
Right. But this also had a very clear message, but it wasn't beating you over the head with it. It showed you, it didn't tell you.
Right, exactly.
Which was part of why it was just so great. But I just thought that was also worth talking about.
Definitely.
Well, to be honest, and I'll just say, if you're doing like Petra, I would not want that to feel like a sermon.
No.
If you're talking about, and Petra being the project that we've talked about before in other podcasts, which is essentially do I want to say the word reboot? Perhaps
Reboot.
no, not a reboot,
We're
but
rebooting
you know,
the Jesus verse.
but basically, yeah, telling the story in a way that has never been told
Yeah.
before, for sure. And that's the point. What you said is it has to be organic. I mean, even that story, everything has to be organic. It can't be, hey, let's stop here and let's preach about, to the audience and make sure that they got this message. They didn't do that in The Sound of Freedom, and it is exactly the right way to do a Christian film. When I left there, it was interesting because I tend to be one of the more critical people especially about Christian films. I left this theater and I didn't have one single thing that I could think of that I did not like about this film. And it was only until y'all started talking about, and I think Mommy mentioned the kids, which I agree with. I mean, I agree with everything that y'all have said, in terms of the things that you didn't like, but I didn't pick up on that because I was really focused and invested in the story, in the acting, in the way that they, and you could see, I know you guys talked about, one of the other things I think y'all mentioned was, you could see that some of the budget might have hurt them in a couple places, like, for example, the fact that the Homeland Security, that didn't really look like a good, legit Homeland Security office. And so that's where the budget might have hurt them a little bit, is in some of their set design and things of that nature, where it could have, a little bit of money here and there could have really made a huge difference in terms of, adding a little bit more gravitas, I guess, to the film. But, those were pretty minor because, like we've said before, at least for me, it's not about the action. It's not about the budget. It's not about the special effects. It's about the story. And this is a really good story, and they told it really, really well. And it was, and that's the bottom line. And that, I think that more than anything else is the reason why it's successful. And that kind of, I know y'all are going to talk about that later, but I think that kind of pretends to, people don't understand. I don't know that Hollywood really understands what makes things successful sometimes. I certainly, I mean, you can see a movie like 300, for example, which was fabulously successful. And then they made the second part, and they had it set up so beautifully. At the end of 300, you're like, oh my goodness, the second one is going to be so great, because the way they had it set up, and you're just thinking this is going to be so good. The second one was just awful. And because they looked at that and they didn't understand what was great about the first one. I think that's the problem that we are facing in a lot of cases. I don't think they understand the dynamics of what makes a movie good and makes people actually want to come out and see something. And but I think for me, it's a story, and it's a good story, and you tell it well. The other stuff can add, but it doesn't really. It's not a make or break thing. It's really all comes back down to it's the story. It's the story. It's the story. But yeah.
I wanted to mention some more of the true story behind all of this and some of the details, because I've been trying to catch up on what's been going on, and there's a lot of extra details on kind of their press tour that Tim Ballard has done for the film. And there's some details that are in the film, for ones that are pretty startling. I think we found that in the United States, it's the number 3. The United States is the number 3 destination for human traffickers. In order to abduct children, we're the number 3 in the world, but we're number 1 in child pornography. And so all of the material, all the media that they're generating for profit from this thing, the U.S. is consuming it at larger rates than any other country in the world. That's pretty startling to me. And it's definitely something that maybe a lot of this is being done, and a lot of these people are being taken to other countries. But the main supporter of this industry comes from the United States. And it's in our backyard. This is something that's happening every day. And some of the things that he's been saying recently are very startling. There's several operations that they've done involving something he referred to as a baby factory. So there's places where they actually have young girls that they've abducted, and they are sexually abusing them. They're having children, becoming pregnant, and they're taking these children that were born under this horrific circumstance, and then they're taking them and then selling them. And so not only that, but a lot of these children that are being born are literally being sacrificed in satanic rituals. And this stuff, something like that, is so unbelievably evil that I think a lot of people just cannot believe that it's happening, or cannot handle a worldview that supports that level of evil. And I think that's causing a lot of problems, and we're going to talk later about the controversy surrounding this. But I think that's one of the reasons why it's really hard to get into. But I thought that was really relevant and worth mentioning.
Well, I think that's a great segue. We could go out of your original order and just kind of talk about the fact that, so there is a lot of controversy surrounding the movie, and what I'm seeing is there's a lot of, it kind of breaks down along ideological lines. I mean, almost universally, every conservative is like crazy gaga, completely in on this movie. And not all, but a lot of the very prominent liberal voices are coming out not really against the movie, but they're trying to discredit, in particular, they're trying to discredit Jim Caviezel. And so it's like, they don't want to go right after the message, because they know that would be, the optics of that would look really, really bad, to say, well, we're for, they're not going to come out and say, well, we're for this, but they're going after the credibility of the messenger, or one of the main messengers, not Tim Ballard in this case, but Jim Caviezel, and trying to discredit him. It's a classic liberal tactic that I've seen used time and time again, where, it's like, well, I'll go back to Ronald Reagan. When he was running for president, they didn't come after Ronald Reagan and his policies and his ideas. They came after his age. And they're trying to discredit him, and they're trying to discredit the messenger. They're not trying to, they can't really fight the message, because the message is a winning message. And this message is a winning message. And so they're not going to fight the winning message. They're going to fight the messenger. And, since Jim Caviezel has kind of been the face of this, that's who they're going after. And so, the question I guess you have to ask in all of this is, well, why? What is the reason why? I guess for me, and I want to be very careful here, because I may have my theories and my thoughts, but we want to be very careful about judgments here and things of that nature. But just the fact that people feel the need to come out against this movie is interesting to me. I don't know why anyone feels the need to try to discredit anything surrounding this movie, or to try in any way. I find that very, curious, I guess.
Right. I think one theory that might be a little bit more charitable than most people would give is that there is anybody who's awake and connected to the world today, post 2020, can see that we are unbelievably divided as a country, and as a world, as everybody in the West or otherwise. The amount of division is just worse and worse and worse and worse. And I think the fact is, Jim Caviezel probably is QAnon. And QAnon people are very far right, and they're a little bit wacky. Some of the things they're suggesting are quite fantastic and uncredible for the most part, and I have to agree with that. And I want to make sure that we're clear about the facts there. And he is a Trump supporter, and all of the things that they're saying are probably true. But He's an actor. He's just an actor. He's a guy. He's a little eccentric. That's not really super important. Yes, he was important to...
So's Johnny Depp, by the way. You know,
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you have eccentric ones on the left as well.
Right,
You know,
right.
So
That just comes with being an actor quite often. But like he suggested, we aren't talking about the person the story's made about, the person who has the most credibility here, the person you need to attack if you're going to attack this story is Tim Ballard. Because if this movie isn't accurate, it's him that's lying. Who cares whether or not... Yes, okay, great. Tim Ballard, Jim Caviezel is a little bit eccentric. He's QAnon and whatever, but that doesn't in any way discredit the factual nature of this film. It's whether or not Tim Ballard is lying or exaggerating about some of the things that he's saying and some of the intel that he's given in order to make the screenplay. And no one has questioned that. Maybe I have heard, and we went through several articles to try to figure out what people are saying, and there are suggestions from different reporters who have gone on raids with him that are suggesting that, well, we're exaggerating a little bit. It's not nearly as bad as what everybody says it is, which to me sounds pretty ridiculous with some of the pretty concrete facts that he's putting out there.
So back to something Geraldine said earlier about not. I think there's a part of people. What's interesting to me is, like I said, why are people wanting to discredit Jim Caviezel? Why are they wanting to discredit this film? Why are they? And I feel like some of the things that I read, like from Newsweek or from other mainstream liberal publications, and just looking at stuff online, they kept saying that this is a conspiracy theory and things like, well, this doesn't really happen, and there's most they're saying, well, most child abuse happens within a home from someone that's a parent to the child or something, and all of that may be true. And I'm not going to say that it isn't, because I haven't studied and haven't looked at all the statistics on it. And that may be true. But to deny the reality that there are people that are being abducted, that there are people that are being trafficked, that there are people that are part of the human slavery and sex slavery institutions, is kind of, to me, like saying, well, it's kind of like the people over in Iran saying, well, the Holocaust didn't really happen. Or Rosie O'Donnell saying, well, George Bush actually applied, explosives to the Twin Towers, and he's the one who brought them down. Not the airplanes flying into them that we saw, everybody saw. To me, it's crazy for someone to suggest that this is not happening. And I don't know why, again, why would you want to make the suggestion that this isn't happening? My mind immediately goes to some dark places to say, are you secretly supporting that? I don't know. I'm not saying that, but it to me, I would be very, very hesitant to be out there saying something to try to suggest that this isn't happening. And, I don't think there's too many rational, sane people who would say that this there's nothing happening here, that this doesn't go on. Yeah.
I was going to suggest, and what I was saying a minute ago, where I was going, is that it's possible that these people are simply promoting or trying to destroy a narrative because it has connections to QAnon, because it has connections to right-wing politics, and that's the only reason. And I can totally see that. Like I've said before, well, we'll talk about that in a second, but definitely you see that on both sides right now in the U.S., where people are, well, that's a right-wing thing, well, I'm not going to have anything to do with that. That's a left-wing thing. I'm just going to accept it blindly because that's part of my tribe, and that's what we believe, so I'm just going to go with that. And it's happening on both sides right now in crazy numbers. And I think you can maybe make a claim that some of that might be questionable and maybe there's something else going on there. But I think right now, as a nation, I think we're just so tribal that I think people are willing to potentially downplay a narrative about human trafficking simply because it came from the wrong side of the aisle.
Well, and one other thing, back to what I was saying that Geraldine was talking about, I think there might be some people, so that I think what you just said plays a large part, but I think there's also some people that it's kind of like you want to just play ostrich. You just want to put your head in the sand. You just want to pretend, there is no war in Ba Sing Se. People don't want to. They don't want to be confronted with the truth, and they don't want to think about horrible things like that. That happened. They just want to pretend that it didn't happen, or that didn't really happen, and so we're going to discredit that, and then I'm going to put it out of my mind, and then I can go on about my day and do what I want to do, and I don't have to think about this horrible thing about these poor children that are in this situation. And I think psychologically there's a lot of people who just don't want to deal with the possible reality that this could actually be happening. And I think that's part of what might be playing into some of this. But to be honest with you, it's a conversation that as a nation we need to have, and we need to, it needs to be something that we need to be having, we need to be having committees in Congress. We need to be having congressional hearings. We need to be looking into this, and we need to, in my mind, if you want to talk about, we've had wars on drugs, we've had wars on poverty, we have a war on child trafficking, we fought a war to end slavery, but yet, I think one of the things they said that we actually, in 2023, there are more people in the world in slavery than has ever been. And yet we fought a war to end a physical, literal war in this country to end slavery, and yet we have more slavery now than we've ever had. That something needs to be done about that, and that's something that if we have to take some drastic measures, we need to. But the first thing we have to do is we have to all agree that it's actually happening, and we can't even do that right now, and that's a huge problem.
Well, I guess a really important question that we're also asking here, and a lot of people are asking, and like I said, I don't want to jump to the conclusions. I think a lot of people on the right are making assumptions that they don't necessarily have any reason to make at this point. But we got to ask. So, backstory on this movie. It was originally funded by Fox, 20th Century Fox. That was before Disney bought Fox. And that was about 5 years ago, I believe. And so whenever that was that Disney acquired Fox, they chose for several years to keep the film on the shelf and then not distribute it, to not do anything with it, taking that $14 million and letting it not accrue any returns at all. And I find that to be a little bit suspicious, and I think a lot of people do that. Not only that, but they just sold it, and they probably, I don't know the facts, but I'm pretty sure they sold it for less than what they got for it, and they probably took a loss on the project as a whole without getting anything from it. And you just got to ask, why is that? Why would that happen?
But were they? I don't know. I'm asking the question: did Disney actually seek a suitor to sell it to, or was it Angel Studios that approached Disney and sought to acquire the rights to it so that they could actually release this? And I mean, the answer to that question is important, obviously, because if Disney was not planning to do anything with this, they were just going to let it sit there and gather dust for indefinitely, forever, or then that seems kind of, I don't know, questionable. Questionable business sense, and questionable for possible other reasons that I won't really go into. But and I want to say, and I don't know, but I want to say that my understanding is that Angel Studios actually approached them to acquire the rights, because they were like, this story needs to be told.
Well, it
and there was
was
a passion that they had to
it
make
was
sure
Jim
it got told.
Caviezel, it was Tim Ballard. They fought for it, and
Yeah.
they didn't give up on the project, even though it was sitting there for that many years. They kept finding ways of trying to make something happen. That's my understanding. Which, yeah, it doesn't look really great for Disney.
No, it's not good optics at all for Disney.
Not good. Doesn't
Especially
look great.
given all the other things that they've had, all the other optics they had. It's a really, really bad optics for them. And I'll just leave it at that.
Well,
you know.
I want to also show the other side of this. Disney didn't choose to fund this project to begin with. They acquired it. So
Right.
they didn't make that decision. And a lot of people who have talked about this movie, or who I know that they approached to distribute the movie, didn't pick it up. And the main reason that was given was that they had a very hard time believing that a movie that was based on such painful and difficult subject matter would do well, because it's just so brutal and dark that they weren't convinced that a general audience would be willing to show up for it. And I think that's, while they were clearly wrong about that, I do think that's a valid concern, and I wouldn't necessarily assume that an audience would have come in massive droves as they have.
Well, to your earlier, what you both guys, you said earlier, right? I think you both said your expectations were really low.
Right.
And you didn't really, it wasn't until the groundswell of support actually happened that you guys started paying attention even
Right.
to this. So, you know, I mean, I think that is a valid concern. But obviously, as you said, they were clearly wrong.
Yeah. I wanted to mention something else. So we were talking about some of the things that people were doing on the left to kind of discredit this movie, and kind of this tribal think and this group think. But we are all completely susceptible to that. And I think we, as a family, bought into that to a huge degree. There's a whole thing going on. You might have heard about AMC theaters blacklisting this movie and trying to make sure that it didn't do well. They're cutting off the air conditioning to the theaters. They're making sure that the projector isn't working right, or they're telling people that a movie theater's sold out when it's not and there's nobody in it. And there's not really anything other than a couple videos that seem questionable that support that idea. When you look at official reports, you look at what the actual AMC Theaters CEO said about the project. He's saying it's a great partnership. We like Angel Studios. They like what they're doing. When he gave this quote, he said, you know, the previous day, which was probably during the weekend, they showed the film over 3,000 times, and they're making a lot of money off of it, and they were happy with the partnership. And to me, that discredits any other thoughts, unless you had something more credible than a couple videos that seemed like they could easily be misinformation.
Well, the most credible thing was Angel Studios coming out and coming to bat for AMC and saying, yeah, no, this is not true. I mean, they're the most credible source here
Right.
when it comes to that sort of thing. So, I mean, for them to come out and to say, you know, the AMC there's nothing wrong with AMC. They're great. They're doing, you know, they have no issues with them whatsoever. So, I mean, yeah, that's all I need to hear. I mean, I'm gonna discount anything I see in the future negatively about AMC. But the thing is, you're right, to your earlier point. You know, initially we were like, well, our first reaction, and I think it was even said in our household, well, we will never ever darken the door of an AMC theater again. If that's that, and I think we actually said that because we believed the initial reports that we were seeing.
Assumed it was right.
Yeah.
Because we have our own particular
Right.
bias that we're applying to this, and so we think, okay, we're very anti-Hollywood here in the Smiley household, if you couldn't tell. But because of that bias, we just assumed, oh, that makes sense. I could totally believe that a big theater like AMC would have just blacklisted a movie like this. It wasn't hard to believe, so we just assumed it was true. We didn't look into it till we actually wanted to sit down and talk about this podcast, and we had to question it and ask, is there facts that this is based on? And I think it goes back to the core of what Verity is about, and we have to focus on truth. And there's a podcast, there's another Christian podcast I've been looking at that seems kind of interesting that's about politics and Christianity, but the name of it is Truth Over Tribe. And I think that's the way we have to approach this stuff more and more. And like I said, we're big proponents of truth and all of this, and we got caught up into this tribalism here. So we all need to check ourselves with this kind of thing. And I think this is just a great example of that. But
back to, the other thing that, and part of the reason, I mean, it wasn't entirely wrong. I mean, part of our dislike of Hollywood, is legitimate and is based on some legitimate things, and not just, the kind of films that they've been making, but, all you have to do is say the name Harvey Weinstein and everybody knows, and gosh. Or even someone like a Kevin Spacey, who's, been indicted multiple times on, sexual abuse charges, hasn't been convicted, I have to add, but he has been indicted in not just, in several different places in other countries, and I think he even has some legal challenges that are still pending at the moment, so we'll don't know the outcome of that at this point, and I don't want to speak to it. But the thing is that you have a lot of bad actors. Harvey Weinstein was probably the poster child of the bad actors of folks in Hollywood that were doing some really, really, really dark stuff. And it's not too great of a leap to go from the things that we documented that happened, that we know that went on, to saying, they probably might be against this, just because they're part of what's going on. It's not a huge intellectual leap to go there. And to your point, we absolutely have to be careful, and I don't want to go there. And I know a lot of people probably do. They're like, yeah, those people, no. Don't want to say that about Disney. Don't want to say that about Hollywood. Don't want to say that about anybody.
We really don't know.
Because we don't know. And we don't want to speak about things we don't know, because we want to stay in the truth and focus on the truth. But, there are facts. There are things that we do know. And, it is easy for you to believe that there are folks out there, that well, let me just put it this way. I don't know that there would be a lot of people that would be shocked if it came out that the worst conspiracy theorists were right about Hollywood and about what's going on, and about their opposition to this movie is because they're part of what's going on. I mean, if that happened, if that turned out to be the case, and it turned out to happen, I don't think I wouldn't be surprised. And I think there are a lot of people that would not be surprised. But, don't want to go there. We're still innocent until proven guilty in this, and we want to stay in the truth and not of all speculation. But yeah, I mean, it's something that I feel like you need to think about, and it's part of the conversation. And you have to wonder a little bit, honestly, if some of the opposition that Hollywood has to this movie isn't because of some of the sexual misconduct that is documented and very prevalent within that sphere and in that area.
It could be. It could be. But despite all of that opposition, despite all of the things that have been hurled against this movie and how long it took to get made, it's made over $155 million in the box office. That's incredible for a movie like that, especially
for a
$14 million movie, $14 million little podunk movie, and it beat out Mission Impossible. That's a pretty amazing feat. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this. I kind of pushed it because I'm like, dude, this is big. This is a huge deal for filmmaking, especially for the kind of stuff that we're trying to do. Because for the longest time, you're not seeing any blockbusters. You're not seeing any big movies that are taking risks in any way, in any shape or form. It's all stuff that we've all seen and heard before a million times. And still, most movies nowadays are based upon an IP that we already know about and something that we're connected to in some way. But the fact that this movie was able to make as much money as it did could potentially open the door for a lot of people to be able to create some projects and to get stuff done that's far more creative and that has more interesting subject matter. And to me, that is one of the most encouraging things about this movie, is the fact that it was as successful as it was. I know a lot of it's still probably due more to its controversial nature, and I think some of the controversy was really helping it, and the fact that there's a lot of animosity towards Hollywood was probably a lot of the reasons why this movie did so well. But still, I think it's sending a message to Hollywood and a lot of other people who are involved in media to what audiences are looking for, what audiences are willing to go to the movies to see. And I hope that Angel Studios, as well as other organizations, are able to make a bigger dent and to open up a sphere for all of us to be able to do more projects. I know that, plus just the availability of technology and the availability of all sorts of things that we didn't have before, is making it a lot more possible for a lot of different people who don't have as many resources as Hollywood to be able to do some great things. And I'm excited, really excited for the future that could mean for us and the kind of things we're doing.
So one thing, and this goes back a ways. This goes back to when I was doing my graduate studies, and I actually did a 3-hour class, which involved doing a study and basically talking about the market and what's happening with this, in Hollywood. And one of the things that I in that paper that I did was showing basically the disconnect between. One thing I did is I took like the top 10 grossing films of all time, and then I took the same year for the last 10 years, like not all time. I did like a 10-year period. I said, okay, here's a 10-year period, the last 10 years. We just looked at the last 10 years. And I said, well, what was the number one grossing film that year for that entire year? And then I looked and I said, okay, well, so what was the Academy Award winning film that year? And what was its box office gross? Where did it rank in terms of box office grossing? And that study was so telling to me. I think there was like maybe 1, 2, maybe at the most, where the top grossing film, one of them was Return of the King. Lord of the Rings, Return of the King was definitely one of them. Where the Academy Award winning film was in fact the top grossing film of the year. I think it was like 1 or 2. Most of the Academy Award winners were like in the 50s in terms of the money that they made. Some of them actually lost money. And to me, what that really showed was a huge disconnect between what Hollywood wants to give us and what we want. And so I feel like that there's definitely been a dissonance between what they think we should be watching and what we want to watch. And to me, when I see this, I mean, okay, we can talk about what we want to, and I know we have our feelings about the movie, but you can also look at another movie, God's Not Dead, that did fabulously well for the budget that it had, made a ton of money. I think if it actually made something good, it could have been explosively crazy. And I think that's what we're seeing here. You're seeing something that was actually well made, and you're seeing people. There's a huge underserved market here of people that are like, finally, something where Hollywood's not cramming their political agenda down our throat, and that's actually, and the Christians aren't cramming their political agenda down our throat, and it's actually good. Yes, we will support that, and they're supporting it in huge numbers. And I've always said that there's an underserved market there, and that if you can thread that needle to where you can just say, you know what, let's shut up about the politics, let's don't talk about PC, let's don't do all the stupid PC things that are required now, almost in some cases. And let's stop talking and preaching at people on the right either. And let's, don't start talking about the message. Let's just tell the story. Find a good story, tell it well. And if you do, I think you're going to see people show up in droves. And that's because there's a market that's starving for this content. And I don't think there's really anyone that is actively trying to address and serve that market. That's the market that's what the market we want to serve. That's the needle we want to thread. And that's kind of what our vision and passion is.
Mm-hmm.
So
all right. Well, I think that's all we're going to have time for today. Thank you guys so much for listening, for all of you who have stuck by us so far. I'm trying to do a couple different things now. I have a YouTube page put up for Verity, so if you look on YouTube, Verity Entertainment, I should try to put it in the notes around here somewhere. And I'm trying to do some short form versions of what we're doing here, whether I'm doing YouTube shorts or whether we're doing just shorter 10-minute videos. So if you have some friends or anybody who might not want to listen to a full hour-long or so podcast, you can still promote and share our stuff from YouTube. So, but thank you. Thanks for watching or listening.